We'll be going over IRS Form 8846, credit for employer Social Security and Medicare taxes paid on certain employee tips. So this is a tax form that mostly is used by restaurant and beverage industry owners to report what's known as, FICA taxes paid, and this is a tax credit, also known as the FICA tax credit. Before we get into the form, which consists of 6 lines that you attach to your income tax return, we'll take a look at a couple of aspects of Social Security and Medicare taxes. So first, Social Security and Medicare tax up to a certain wage limit are paid in equal amounts by the employee and the employer. So for Social Security, that is 6.2% of the employee's wages. That includes hourly wages and tip income, up to, for 2022, a salary base limit of $147,000. On the other side, the Medicare tax, that's 1.45% of employee compensation without any salary limit. So the combination of the Social Security and the Medicare taxes is 7.65% up to $147,000 for 2022, and then after $147,000, 1.45%. Now this is an equal percentage that is paid by the employee and then by the employer. So the employee pays 7.65% and the employer pays 7.65%. And then above that limit, the employee pays 1.45% and the employer pays 1.45%. Now, there is an additional Medicare tax of 0.9% that above a certain income threshold. That is an employee only paid tax, not borne by the employer. And the reason we talk about this is because the employer side that the tips are paid for, that's what the employer is taking a tax credit for. So, however, if you have tipped employees that are tipped at an hourly rate less than the minimum wage rate, which for 2022 was $5.15 per hour, then any tips that are used to bridge the gap between the employee's rate and the minimum wage rate are not counted as a credit for Social Security and Medicare taxes paid. And there actually is an example in the form instructions. We'll talk a little bit about it once we get to calculating tip income. So let's start at the top of the form. In line 1, you'll enter tips that were received by employees for services on which you paid or incurred employer Social Security and Medicare taxes during the year. So in the form instructions, this includes tips received from customers for providing, delivering, and serving food or beverages for consumption if tipping of employees is customary. So for example, at a high-end restaurant where waiters and waitresses and servers are normally earn their money through tips, that would be customary. Working at McDonald's, tips are generally not customary. So in line 1, you'll report the tips received by those employees. In line 2, you'll report tips not subject to the credit provisions. So this is kind of what I was discussing a little bit earlier. Basically, if you pay each tipped employee equal to or more than $5.15 per hour as an hourly wage, then you can enter 0 because this does not impact your situation. But the form instruction has an example for an employee that worked 100 hours and received $450 in tips. Now, during that same 100 hours, the worker also received $375 in wages. So that's a rate of $375 per hour. The employer cannot take a full tax credit for the $450 that were reported in tip income because the amount of tip income that the employer can take a credit on only starts once the employee has the minimum wage rate of $5.15 per hour. So basically what the employer has to do is credit the $375 in wages up to $515. That represents 100 hours of work at $5.15 per hour. So that difference, the $515 minus the $375, that's a difference of $140. And that $140 has to be excluded from the tax credit calculation. So in this scenario, the $450 is reduced by $140, leaving $310 of the employee tips that are eligible for the tax credit. So to put this into the form, let's actually use that example. So the employee received, let's see, it was $450 in tips. Okay, so we'll just say so the tips not subject to the credit provisions, that would be the $140. In other words, that was the amount that was used to bring the employee's hourly wage rate up to the $515. So the remaining amount happens to be $310. That is what's taken into account as a credible tip. Okay? So we already talked about line 3. Now in line 4, we're going to multiply this line 3 amount by 7.65%. So we'll circle back to the what if scenario for certain highly paid employees in just a second. Right now, I'm going to enter the grand total of 2372. And in most cases, you would probably just round up. So now, if you had employees whose wages exceeded the Social Security base rate, then what the form, you would check this box, and what you would have to do is you would have to go back into the tips received by employees. You would have to determine how much you need to multiply by the 1.45% on amounts that exceed the Social Security wage base. And then you would have to provide an additional calculation spreadsheet that shows the work that you did. Basically, complete your homework and then show your calculation. And then include in this. But what you can't do is request a tax credit for the entire 7.65% on employee compensation that exceeded the threshold. So for example, if you had an employee that made $150,000, you can report 7.65% on the first $147,000, receive that tax credit because that would be an employer responsibility. The additional $3,000 in employee income for that employee, you can only request a tax credit of 1.45% because you would not have paid Social Security taxes on that additional $3,000. So on line 5, if you had any tax credit for employer Social Security or Medicare taxes paid on certain employee tips that flowed through from either partnerships or S corporations, you would enter that here in line 5. And then in line 6, this represents your total credit that you will, for partnerships and S corporations, report this on Schedule K. All other taxpayers, you report this amount on as part of the general business tax credit, which is reported on IRS Form 3800, Part 3, line 4F. So that is all we have for this form. There are a couple of other things that I should point out. If you have fiscal year taxpayers, which would be taxpayers, as companies or partnerships that report the end of their fiscal year at the end of September each year, then there are special instructions on how to calculate employee and wage and tip base for the Social Security wage base. So be sure to pay attention to that. And again, just everything else here kind of reiterates what we just discussed. The additional Medicare tax is addressed here. How you determine the credit, we kind of walk through that. And that's it. This form is fairly straightforward. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes, assuming you have the information at hand to be able to complete this form. If you need more information, though, we've written an entire article that walks you through each of these lines step by step in a little bit more detail. You can check it out on our website at teachmepersonalfinance.com. Simply type in IRS Form 8846 in the search bar, and you should see this article appear. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. If you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.